Japan has a habit of turning ordinary objects into quiet forms of connection, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through small, intentional designs that make relationships feel warmer, steadier, and easier to navigate. Across the country, simple tools, household items, and everyday rituals act like emotional technology, subtle systems that strengthen trust, reduce friction, and make people feel cared for without saying a word. Some of these ideas are centuries old, others are modern conveniences hiding in plain sight, but all of them share the same quiet brilliance. They make relationships better by design, not by accident. Here are 12 Japanese ideas that can instantly improve the way people connect and could easily work in your own life. 1. Kakebo, the relationship budgeting tool. In Japan, money conversations don't start with spreadsheets. They start with a notebook. A kakebo is a simple budgeting journal, but its real purpose is emotional. It gives couples a structured, non-confrontational way to talk about spending, goals, and priorities. Instead of arguing about receipts, the notebook becomes neutral ground, a place where decisions are written, not weaponized, where transparency replaces tension. Writing things down slows the conversation just enough to keep it calm, giving both people space to think before they react. Numbers that once felt accusatory begin to read like information instead of ammunition, softening the emotional charge around money. Over time, the notebook becomes a quiet witness to the relationship's growth, documenting the choices that shape a shared life. Patterns emerge in the margins, habits, priorities, compromises, revealing how the couple actually lives, not how they imagine they live. Reviewing the notebook together becomes a gentle check-in, a moment to realign before resentment has a chance to build. Even its physical presence matters. It feels grounded and harder to ignore than a digital app that disappears behind notifications. Many couples find themselves talking more openly simply because the format gives them permission to be honest without feeling exposed. A kakebo doesn't solve financial problems by itself, but it creates the conditions where solutions finally have room to appear. Money stops being a taboo topic and becomes a shared language the relationship can actually use, turning tension into teamwork. And in a world where financial stress can quietly erode even strong partnerships, that shift is powerful enough to change the entire dynamic. 2. Kotatsu, the warmth generating table. A kotatsu is a low wooden table with a heater underneath and a blanket draped over the sides. Families gather around it in winter, legs tucked under the warmth, conversations drifting naturally. More than furniture, it functions like a closeness machine. The heat draws people in, the blanket keeps them there, phones get set aside, and time slows without anyone noticing. A kotatsu creates an environment where connection happens effortlessly. The warmth does most of the work. The soft glow of the heater turns the space into a tiny sanctuary, a pocket of comfort carved out of the cold. Even silence shifts, less like an absence, more like a shared moment that doesn't need filling. Arguments rarely survive here, the heat softens moods, and the closeness makes conflict feel out of place. Over time, the kotatsu becomes the unofficial meeting point of the home, a gravitational center that pulls everyone back together at the end of the day. Children do homework there, adults read or nap, and guests instinctively settle in as if the table itself is welcoming them. The blanket forms a protective boundary, almost ceremonial, as if stepping underneath it means entering a temporary truce. In a world full of distractions that pull people apart, the kotatsu quietly gathers them again without asking for anything in return. It serves as a gentle reminder that sometimes the easiest way to strengthen a relationship is simply to create a warm place where people naturally want to stay. 3. Bento, the care-packed lunchbox. A bento isn't just a meal, it's a message. Every compartment, every ingredient, every bit of arrangement says, I thought about you before you even woke up. More than food, it's emotional labor made visible, preparation, planning, and care condensed into a box small enough to carry. Applied to relationships, the bento principle is simple. Care doesn't need volume. It thrives on organization, intention, and work done quietly in advance. A well-made bento shows effort in a way that feels gentle rather than performative, turning everyday nourishment into a quiet act of devotion. The person receiving it doesn't just taste the food. They feel the time, the attention, the small decisions made with them in mind. Even the layout matters. The balance of colors, textures, and portions reflects a desire to make someone's day a little easier. A thoughtful bento anticipates needs the way good partners do, offering comfort before discomfort even appears. Routine shifts into ritual, turning a simple lunch break into a moment of being cared for. The box becomes a portable expression of presence, a way of saying, I'm with you, even when you're apart. And because it's small, repeatable, and endlessly customizable, it becomes a template for everyday affection. In a world where grand gestures get all the attention, the bento quietly proves that consistency is the real foundation of connection. A tiny container ends up carrying something much larger, the feeling of being remembered. 4. Furoshiki, the cloth that makes anything a gift. A furoshiki is a square of fabric used to wrap objects, and the wrapping is the point. Even something ordinary becomes meaningful when it's folded with attention. The cloth turns a simple item into a gesture, a moment, a memory. Presentation matters here not for vanity, but for intention. A furoshiki slows the act of giving just enough to make it feel deliberate, turning a quick exchange into a small ceremony. The folds themselves become part of the message, a quiet signal that someone took time to prepare something meant specifically for you. The object inside doesn't change, but the experience of receiving it does. Because the fabric can be reused endlessly, it carries traces of past moments the way good traditions do. Applied to relationships, the furoshiki principle elevates the everyday, wrapping small acts of kindness in a layer of thoughtfulness. Care doesn't need to be expensive, it needs to be intentional. Even a modest gift feels different when it arrives wrapped in softness rather than handed over casually. The cloth becomes a bridge between practicality and emotion, turning utility into something almost poetic. And in a world where most things arrive in disposable packaging, a furoshiki stands out as a gesture meant to be remembered. A simple square of fabric that quietly proves presentation isn't decoration, but communication. 5. Omiyage, the built-in, I thought of you system. In Japan, when you travel, you bring back omiyage, small gifts from the place you visited. It isn't optional, it's expected. And that expectation creates connection. It's about the message. Even when I was away, you were part of my thoughts. This simple system keeps relationships warm across distance. The gifts are usually small, and snacks, trinkets, regional specialties, yet their meaning is far larger than their size. They act as tiny anchors that keep people emotionally present even when they're physically gone. The ritual removes the awkwardness of should I bring something back and replaces it with a shared cultural rhythm everyone understands. Travel becomes a relational act rather than a purely personal experience. Even workplaces participate, with colleagues bringing back treats that spark conversations and soften the return to routine. Bright, intentional packaging makes the gesture feel like a celebration rather than an obligation. Receiving omiyage becomes a moment of recognition, a brief pause where someone feels remembered. It offers a gentle antidote to the distance that travel can create, a quiet way of saying, I didn't leave you behind. Because the tradition is so consistent, it builds a subtle trust. You know you'll be thought of, even when life pulls people in different directions. And in a world where distance can easily turn into silence, omiyage keeps the thread of connection alive with surprising strength. 6. Kintsugi, the gold repair kit. Kintsugi is the art of repairing broken pottery with lacquer mixed with gold. The cracks aren't hidden, they're highlighted. Instead of pretending damage never happened, kintsugi makes the repair itself the point. The gold isn't decoration, it's evidence of effort. It reframes damage as history, turning fractures into features rather than flaws. The idea suggests that the moments that nearly break us can become the moments that define us, if handled with care. The repair process is slow and deliberate, mirroring the patience required to rebuild trust after a difficult conversation. Each golden seam represents a choice to stay, to listen, and to try again when walking away might have been easier. The finished piece carries its past openly, rejecting the illusion of perfection that so often suffocates real connection. In a relationship, that kind of honesty becomes a strength, a shared acknowledgement that growth often comes from the places that hurt. Kintsugi teaches that healing isn't about erasing what happened, but integrating it into the story in a way that adds depth. Vulnerability becomes visible, something that can be appreciated rather than feared. 7. Engawa, the boundary building architecture. Traditional Japanese homes have an engawa, a wooden walkway between the inside and the outside. It's a liminal space. Not quite indoors, not quite outdoors, a buffer that softens transitions. In a relationship, an engawa becomes the space you create between emotion and reaction, the gap between I'm upset and I'm going to say something I regret. The engawa slows you down, giving you a moment to breathe before stepping fully into the next space. It reminds you that not every feeling requires immediate action, and not every thought deserves instant volume. The pause it offers is gentle, not forced, a natural invitation to gather yourself before crossing a threshold. In a home, the engawa shields the interior from the harshness of the outside world. Between two people, it protects the connection from the harshness of impulsive words. Boundaries here aren't walls, but transitions, places where you can adjust, recalibrate, and choose your tone with intention. Standing in that in-between space gives you perspective, letting you see both sides without being consumed by either. It's where clarity forms, where emotions settle just enough to be expressed without causing unnecessary damage. Couples who build their own emotional engawa create room for grace, a buffer that absorbs tension before it becomes conflict. And in a world that rewards instant reactions, the engawa offers a quieter wisdom. The strongest relationships are often the ones that leave space between the feeling and the response. A simple strip of wood becomes a blueprint for healthier communication. 8. Daruma doll, the goal-setting object. A Daruma doll starts with one blank eye. You paint the first eye when you set a goal, and the second when you achieve it. Couples often use them for shared goals, saving for a trip, building a habit, finishing a project. The doll sits on a shelf, staring with its single eye, quietly reminding you of the promise you made. The Daruma's weighted base makes it stand back up when pushed over, a physical reminder that progress rarely happens in a straight line. Its round shape and determined expression give it a kind of stubborn optimism, as if it's rooting for you even when motivation dips. Every glance at that unfinished eye becomes a nudge, a gentle pressure to keep moving toward what you said mattered. Over time, the doll becomes a shared witness, a silent third party holding both people to their commitments. Abstract intentions turn into something visible, something that occupies space instead of fading into memory. Painting the second eye is a small moment, but it feels earned, a celebration of effort rather than luck. The ritual shifts goal setting from a private hope into a collaborative act, strengthening the bond between the people who share it. Even unfinished Daruma have value. They show what you're still working toward, what still deserves attention. And in a world full of forgotten resolutions, the Daruma stands as a quiet, persistent reminder that follow-through is a form of love. 9. Senbazuru, the 1,000 crane commitment project. Folding one paper crane is easy. Folding 1,000 is a commitment. Senbazuru is the practice of creating 1,000 origami cranes, often as a wish for health, peace, or good fortune. For couples, it becomes a long-term project, a slow, steady collaboration that demands patience, teamwork, and shared purpose. The meaning isn't in the cranes themselves, but in the time spent making them. Each one becomes a tiny record of a shared moment, a physical imprint of the minutes you chose to spend together. Some cranes are folded neatly, others a little crooked, but each one reflects the mood of the moment it was made. The growing pile forms a visual timeline of the relationship, 1,000 small reminders that progress is built one deliberate action at a time. Senbazuru shows that commitment isn't a single decision, but a series of tiny choices repeated again and again. As the cranes accumulate in boxes, jars, and baskets, the home turns into a landscape of intention. Finishing all 1,000 feels less like completing a craft and more like completing a journey you walk together. And when the final crane is folded, the meaning isn't in the wish you make. It's in the 1,000 quiet moments that led you there. Senbazuru becomes a reminder that love grows the same way, one small, consistent act at a time. 10. Hanko, the personal commitment stamp. In Japan, people don't sign documents. They stamp them with a hanko, a personal seal. A hanko is a physical symbol of identity and commitment. Using one in a relationship, even informally, turns agreements into rituals. A tiny stamp that quietly says, "We're in this together." Because each hanko is carved uniquely, it carries a sense of individuality that signatures rarely match. Pressing it into ink and placing it on paper feels ceremonial, as if you're marking a moment rather than simply acknowledging it. The weight of the stamp, the texture of the paper, the brief pause before pressing down, all of it adds gravity to even the smallest promises. Couples sometimes create playful or symbolic hanko for shared projects, turning commitments into something tangible and fun. The act of stamping becomes a shared gesture of physical motion that reinforces the idea of partnership. Casual agreements turn into memories, anchored in a way that makes them harder to forget or dismiss. The seal itself becomes a tiny artifact of the relationship, a reminder of decisions made side by side. Even seeing the hanko resting on a desk can spark a sense of unity, a subtle cue that you're building something together. In a world where most commitments are digital and fleeting, a hanko brings back the weight of intention. A small object turns promises into something you can hold, something that feels real. 11. Sencha-do, the tea-making ritual. The Japanese tea ritual isn't about drinking tea, it's about presence. Every step is quiet. Sencha-do becomes a practice of slowing down, creating a pocket of calm where nothing needs to be solved, fixed, or discussed. Just two people, one ritual, and a few minutes of peace. The simplicity of the ritual is its strength, stripping away everything except the act of being together. The sound of water pouring, the warmth of the cup, the gentle rise of steam, all of it forms a rhythm that naturally softens the atmosphere. This is a space where neither person needs to perform or impress, because the ritual itself carries the moment. Quiet invites honesty not through conversation, but through shared stillness. Even small gestures, passing a cup, adjusting the kettle, clearing the table, become expressions of care. Sencha-do teaches patience, reminding both people that connection doesn't always come from talking. Sometimes it comes from simply existing side by side. The ritual acts like a reset button, a way to return to each other after long days or difficult moments. The tea doesn't need to be special, the attention is what makes it meaningful. In a world that moves quickly, Sencha-do offers a rare kind of slowness, a moment where time feels like it expands instead of slipping away. It gently proves that peace isn't found in grand gestures, but in the quiet rituals we choose to share. 12. Omotenashi, hospitality as a system. Omotenashi is often translated as hospitality, but in practice it's closer to emotional UX design. The art of anticipating needs before they're spoken, preparing a space before someone arrives, noticing small discomforts and removing them quietly. This isn't servitude, it's attentiveness, a system for making people feel seen without making a show of it. It's the way someone warms a room before you walk in or sets aside your favorite cup without mentioning it. A quiet habit of noticing patterns, how you take your tea, where you like to sit, what helps you unwind after a long day. The magic lies in its invisibility. The best omotenashi feels effortless, even though it's built on deep observation. Nothing is dramatic, yet everything is intentional, creating an atmosphere where comfort feels engineered rather than accidental. Omotenashi shows that love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's expressed through preparation. The goal isn't to impress, but to ease, to remove friction from someone's path before they even notice it. In a world where people often wait to be asked, omotenashi encourages action before the need becomes a burden. It's a form of care that doesn't seek credit, because the reward is simply knowing someone else feels held. Practiced consistently, it turns a relationship into a place where both people feel quietly supported, almost without realizing why. Japan's relationship wisdom isn't built on dramatic gestures, but on small, intentional practices that make daily life feel calmer and more connected. These ideas are simple, human-shaped, and easy to fold into the routines you already share. If one of them resonated with you, try carrying it into your week and notice how it shifts the atmosphere between you and the people you care about. Real change rarely comes from big moments. It grows from small choices made consistently. These aren't just cultural concepts, they're practical blueprints for connection, and even one of them can reshape the way you show up for someone you love.